Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets close out their in-season tournament in style with a 115-103 victory over the Toronto Raptors and their third straight win in a row. We break down the chaos that was the NBA Cup and where the Nets stand in the NBA hierarchy of the Eastern Conference, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms. And Doug, a bit of a unique version of a post-game podcast for us because, yes, the Brooklyn Nets get the win. Yes, it's a 3-game winning streak, but also this in-season tournament had some real legs, and wouldn't you know it, the Nets did Boston some favors on the way out the door.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, the Nets did what they were supposed to do. They did, put up as good of an effort in this in-season tournament as I think you can, right? End up going 3-1, just kind of lose out on the tiebreakers with the team that they lost to, and there's really not that much that can be done about that. But I think in general, I think you like what you saw from the in-season tournament just in general. I think again, we talked about this on previous podcasts. The Tuesday night in November had juice to it for sure. Like if you were into the NBA, you were into some of what was going on. And, especially with the Nets and just kind of scoreboard watching, or you just maybe you had the multi-view like we had going on, just watching multiple games at once and just watching Boston steamroll over the Bulls. But, not brutal. Burn for them not to move on.
Yeah.
Ultimately get the W, get to 9-8, and that's really the most important thing for the Nets. So I think all in all, a really cool night of basketball. And it's just fun to just, kind of see what's going around the rest of the league, know that there's a little bit of fate tied to it, even though it didn't work out for the Nets this time.
Yeah, he wanted them to at least hold themselves respectfully inside of the group stage, right? And I will say, too, because you're talking about watching multiple games. Now, the Boston one was its own problem. Like, tip of the hat to Chicago. Thanks for nothing. But then you also looked around. Atlanta didn't do you any favors against Cleveland. Miami also took care of Milwaukee. The New York Knicks absolutely trounced the Charlotte Hornets. So in the old, when you think, well, if we just get this one thing to happen here, potentially, there was the direct hierarchy of it, but all the scenarios for the Brooklyn Nets outside of them winning their own game did not break the way it was supposed to. The good news is the Brooklyn Nets beat the Toronto Raptors at home. They have their third straight win here. And I think when we look inside of this game, it did take about 5 minutes for both squads to wake up, to even think that they were playing in an actual basketball game. But then it got back to some of the tenets of what the Nets have done so well so far this season, especially trying to, even though it was a bit of a slog, hit down some clutch perimeter shots when they needed them.
Yeah, ultimately, I think they played really well. Look, obviously, win by 12, 115-103. Probably a little closer than the score would suggest. They tacked on a few easy baskets there at the end. This guy, I don't think it was ever like a huge threat. I guess it got close enough there in the last couple of minutes before they ultimately pulled away. But I think we've seen this team sort of, over the last couple games, wake up in the second quarter specifically, right? After maybe just not getting off to too strong of a start, wake up in the second quarter. This one they outscored the Raptors 30-23 to start, mini pulling away. Raptors kind of clawed back there in the third quarter. Overall, I think we saw a lot of what the Nets have been mostly trying to do offensively. I think I saw a few different things tonight, which I want to make mention of. We don't have to get into it right away. A few different sort of offensive principles that were on display. I think it's a good sign for them going forward. The Raptors are a team that's probably a little easier to pull some of this stuff off because they're not just like a super, super dynamic team. But overall, this game didn't really deviate too far from what the Nets' general principles around just like what they want to do both offensively and defensively. And when you play against the Raptors, I mean, I don't know, maybe these teams are matched equally in terms of talent overall, right? Like between the two teams. I think it's just a good sign that we just see the Nets continually, I still think, just punch above their weight in terms of like who they're actually running out there on the court.
Yeah, it was funny. That was actually one of the things I thought about inside of this game as well, because we'll save, as you say, some of the tactics here coming up in a little bit. But when you think about where they are in the standings and the hierarchy of the Eastern Conference, we know we're below the Bostons and the Milwaukees of the world, or maybe below Orlando, who's surging up the board right now at 12-5 in third position. But when you look at the recent schedule, and we talked about this even going forward here too, well, there's a lot of winnable games. That's predicated on the idea that in the end, we will look back and think they're better than the Atlanta Hawks. They're better than the Toronto Raptors. Some of these teams may end up making moves when it comes to the deadline. And I'll point out a very obvious one, someone we're going to talk about at a later date, Cam Thomas, as far as his return and the update around that. But I'll tell you right now, when you look at Toronto, Pascal Siakam, OG is out there, Barnes is out there, like they've got their complement, right? They've got all the key figures there. If you tell me that the Brooklyn Nets have Cam Thomas, sorry, the early return on this season already tells me he's a difference maker in a lot of these games where maybe they aren't even as close through 3 or 4, three quarters, midway through the fourth, and they can pull away a little bit more. It doesn't matter. Injuries happen. But I would say that the Nets, going with some veteran heavy talent in absence of some of these other key players, are showing you, as you said, punching above their weight, finding a way to scrap out some wins. And it really does, again, it feels like a broken record in this kind of aspect of it. The Nets need these games early in the season. They are not a team that can afford to drop, quote, winnable games. Winnable game on the schedule, Nets go out and get it.
Yeah, and I think actually one underrated thing, I do want to talk about Royce O'Neale because obviously like he was a big story to this game.
Oh, yeah.
I will say an underrated thing about this team, and like so when you look at the Nets team that took the court tonight, you say to yourself, okay, well they've dealt a lot with injuries. Now specific, which is true, right? They are missing a couple key guys in Cam Thomas and in Ben Simmons. But the team that they ran out here, at least to start, like is a group that has played a lot of minutes together,
Yes.
right? Like
yes.
because it goes back to last year. This is the group that played, pretty much the whole, I don't know, it's not the second half of the season, but, from the trade deadline on, like this was the group, right?
Yep.
Spencer, Cam, Mikhail, DFS, and Claxton. This group has been good. Like just, going into this game. So this isn't calculated for this one. It's going to look even better after this one. This group had played 397 minutes, plus 7 net rating, 117 offensive, 110 defensive. Like this team is just that starting five has been a good NBA starting five over now well over 400 minutes. And like I said, it's going to look even better once these numbers catch up and like the data's crunched for this next game. It shouldn't be that surprising, I guess, right? That they can play well. And like you can back out some of these injuries because the continuity, at least around that five, and throw in Royce, because Royce O'Neale has played a lot of minutes with those guys as well. Those are teams. That's the team that's done well. Last year was a problem because after that they had nothing. They had nothing. Like they actually probably had negatives that they were bringing in, negative kind of guys that legit aren't even playing in the NBA right now. Like Patty Mills, gone. Joe Harris, love these guys, gone. Like these guys don't play. And so I think that like we kind of probably quickly forget that because it's easy to look at the number of injuries that they've sustained this year and think, oh, okay, well, the king can never get right. That is true, but this group is not true about it. This group has continuity. And I think that actually means something. I think that's part of the reason we saw the payoff tonight.
That combined with having a deeper bench is what's converted that team that had a below 500 record over those last 27 games, that group of starters you mentioned. Now they're able to win some of those games because you have someone else to pass the baton off to. We'll dive in on a couple of key stats out of the box score here and the new tactics that Doug was very pleased about from Jock Vaughn and the Brooklyn Nets. After we remind you, though, man, our partners over at eBay have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd. Everybody knows him, to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for your daily draft or you're scouting that waiver wire, every week we're going to be providing you with players guaranteed to fit onto your roster. Dougster, let's take a look at who Josh has on his eBay's guaranteed fit fantasy picks of the week.
Yeah, Josh got some good ones going out here this week. First one, Jaden Ivey. Now the Pistons stink, but we don't really care about that too much for fantasy purposes. Jaden Ivey ran to the starting lineup over Killian Hayes. Now he's really stepped it up, getting to the hoop, getting a lot more shots. Again, the Pistons are not a good team, but his minutes have been pretty safe, and that says something for one thing when you're playing on a bad team for your minutes to be safe. So he likes Jaden Ivey. I like that one too. Maybe like Saddiq Bey. They lost the Hawks lost Jalen Johnson for a while here. Saddiq Bey is now going into the starting lineup for the Hawks. Minutes are the real key component to a lot of your fantasy plays. If you're going to see a bump in minutes, Saddiq Bey is definitely one of those guys that's going to do it. A couple more he had. Al Horford, he's been filling in for Staps. They've been keeping the minute run on him pretty high too. So you got to like that. Gordon Hayward, unfortunate brutal injury to LaMelo Ball. Gordon Hayward going to handle more on-ball duties with LaMelo out of the mix. Just some of what Josh Lloyd is throwing out there on the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, trying to win you your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs. eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, the prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items apply. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
All right, so as we continue to wrap up the 115-103 victory for the Brooklyn Nets over the Toronto Raptors, and effectively the end of the in-season tournament as we see it, although I'll be interested actually to keep my eye on Vegas, and now you get to these other semifinals, and there's some teams, right? Boston makes it through. I think that makes it exciting. I think that sets up to maybe have some teams be a little bit chippier earlier in the playoffs should they meet again. But Doug, I think this sets the table for when we talk about how the Nets found a way to win this game, maybe in a less than typical fashion, because the Nets were outshot in terms of just overall from the field, 101-89. And then the more damning thing from a Nets perspective is they shot just 13 of 38, 34% from beyond the arc. Those numbers, if again, we say, look at the box score, you go, oh boy, the Nets specifically could be in a really hard spot. I thought getting to the free throw line was a big factor inside of this, and we'll get to Spencer Dinwiddie in that vein. But what did you see offensively that allowed them to find a way to still get a lead here as they work through the second and third quarters?
All right, yeah. Before we talk to that, I do want to just make mention of Royce O'Neale here, right? So, because a big part of this,
praises, Choice Royce, baby.
There's a couple of X's and O's things, but before that, Royce O'Neale, we have to make mention to it. We went through the first 10 minutes. I mean, my goodness, 6 for 12 from three. He follows up another good shooting game. He actually hadn't really shot, and it actually looked rough for him for a few games in a row, where we were kind of just head scratching, right? Like he played 25 minutes, took no threes against Philly, which was terrible. The Atlanta game kind of got X'd out of the rotation and only shot 2, didn't make anything, went 0 for 2. Starts to kind of climb back into things in Miami, and then starts to break it out of the box in Chicago, 6 for 10 and then 6 for 12. He's 12 for his last 22 from beyond the arc. He's got himself up over 40% 3-point shooting for the season. I mean, it's obviously not sustainable, but he was feeling it tonight for sure. I know sometimes fans want to just, get a little frustrated with the play, and he definitely has pulled a disappearing act for multiple games, right? So like there's a reason to not, just be riding the Royce O'Neale train all the way through here. But this is a nice little glimpse of a guy, like this is what he can do. Like he can still bomb from three if he's given open looks. It looks like it gets up there in slow motion, but it definitely ends up going in.
And a 1 and a 2.
Well, and I'll tell you right now, this is like having your cake and eating it too, because whether you think that you want the Nets to like keep things together and have a good versatile rotation that can like go later into the season, and a guy that can kind of play with a lot of different lineups, well, that's great. Check. If, on the other hand, you are trying to build up trade value, because this is going to kind of guy that's going to maybe be moved sometime in the trade deadline. I don't think you're going to get a first for him at this point, but maybe you're just looking to get assets. Okay, great. Check also, because now he's actually showing that he has the ability to do this stuff. So like for a guy like him, I think it is important for him to stay in the rotation. And it's really nice to see these kind of shooting displays, because everyone else gets to see these too. And the numbers just end up becoming the numbers. And if he's a 40% 3-point shooter, like that has value either on your team or out there on the market.
Yeah, we talked about him coming into this season. I said, go back to that last 27 games a year ago. He maintained the consistency after the trade. A lot of guys looked different, didn't look as productive when we talk about going, by the way, for Royce, starting role, bench role, pseudo point guard, small ball 5. Like they asked him to do a lot of different things. And I'd highlighted this the other day, combining him with Dorian Finney-Smith. But you mentioned it. Royce O'Neale is averaging 6 3-point attempts per game. Probably even goes up a little bit off of this one once they improve the numbers. The Nets have 6 players taking at least 6 3-point attempts per game, and Lonnie Walker is almost there at 5.8. Among those guys, after Lonnie at 47%, and he had a little bit of an off night tonight for himself, it's Dorian Finney-Smith, and now it's Royce O'Neale up over 40%. Those two veteran players, just to your point, they are the guys that have been critical to stemming the tide with some injuries early in the year, especially when Cameron Johnson was out. And they might be critical to this team getting extra value beyond this season should they make different decisions down the line. Inside of this game specifically, though, especially when you go back and watch the early portion of this, and if we extend it out even into some of the rest of the players inside of this rotation, it was a really brutal night for Spencer Dinwiddie from a shooting perspective. That's when you need to be able to look to one of these veterans to say, pick up the slack on this. It was all Royce. If you back out his minutes tonight with the way Lonnie was struggling a little bit, this would be a very different game. That's why when you're shooting volume like this, sometimes it needs to be up to one guy to kind of really carry it. That was all Royce. Didn't take a single shot anywhere inside the arc.
Yeah, and actually that dovetails pretty well into like what I was thinking about some of the things that we saw from the offense. Now, obviously Dinwiddie's 5 for 18 looks bad, but the 10 for 10 from the line looks great. And that's not, it wasn't by accident. Like him getting to the line 10 times was not by accident. It was by design. The Nets, one of their go-to just sort of offensive sets is trying to get, especially if a team has slower bigs, they are working overtime to get those bigs into ISO actions, right? And they'll screen and rescreen until usually Dinwiddie gets on a guy like Jakob Poeltl and can kind of like take him to the rack or run the pick and roll with a lob threat. You know, the lobs didn't always connect in this game, but there was definitely an effort to do it. I mean, he did finish Dinwiddie for all the shooting problems. It was a 23-8-9 in this game, right? Yeah, and so getting to the line like that was they were working overtime to try to get him fouled, like because it worked, right? Like he wants to get into those. He wants to, like, if they're not going to tag the screener, he's going to try to get into the mid range. He's really good at that sort of rip move to kind of get up and get fouled, and he sells it pretty well. And so I think overall we saw that, and also, but that's like a usual thing for the Nets. Like they do that a lot. Like they run that high screen big switch stuff a decent amount. It might be probably the most popular of their offensive sets, probably. Second thing that I think I saw a lot tonight was a lot more pin down off ball screening. It wasn't hugely, they didn't use it a ton, but they definitely used it more. Saw multiple times where Cam Johnson was screening for pin downs for Mikal off ball. They were running those to be off ball screens, like not like a Spain pick and roll, like screen the screener stuff, but like making sure that they could get one switch before the next switch. And they didn't do it a ton, but they did it enough to notice. And I was like, oh, this is good. Like they are getting a little bit more off-ball screening action, pin down action to be able to free up the shooters, or to get like shooters in space, or guys like space to be able to take a dribble and either get into the mid-range or get to the rim. That's a good sign for the Nets to have like something more of a dynamic offense going forward. They definitely need to be doing that, especially without Cam Thomas on the court. So it was really good, I think, from those two perspectives to see that kind of stuff happen tonight.
Yeah, the off ball, you mentioned it. There was a couple of backdoor cuts for Mikal Bridges getting at the basket with relative ease, but it's the byproduct of setting it up the right way. Far too often we talked about is Mikal Bridges. You look inside of his box score, 9 of 17, only had 3 attempts from beyond the arc, but came away with 10 rebounds, 5 assists, 22 points, and a plus 15 margin. But the off ball work for him, we said, putting Mikal constantly into the ISO where he has to go and create his own space and his own shot. Now he can navigate into that mid-range and it's great, but the way to make the offense a little more cohesive, right? A little more free-flowing possession to possession where we don't feel like it stagnates is that thing. How do you create off these screens and double screens or pin downs an availability for Mikal to say, now I'm running, right? Now I'm running free. I get the ball in my hand. And we've seen that. When he's in open space, whether in transition or getting to the half court sets, you know that he makes the right basketball decision almost more often than not. So I thought that was a really productive way for this team to look at a game like this, in a matchup like this, and say, yeah, there is kind of a systematic way that we can start to break them down. Wasn't pretty early, but they really did the job late. Coming up here in a second, take a little nod and some historical reference to Nicholas Claxton and his defensive performance, and just kind of tie a little bow here on the Brooklyn Nets 3-game winning streak. We'll do that coming up in just 1 second.
All right, before we talk about that, we'll get it to our friends over at FanDuel right now. On FanDuel, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. If you listen to the pregame show, Toronto, Brooklyn, we were on the money line minus 133. You got your $5 money line bet in on that. Bam. You got $150 in bonus bets from FanDuel. That's because your team won. And that's what the Nets have been. Hey, look. There's nothing better than having your team win and grabbing some bonus bets from FanDuel at the same time. You got to be a new customer. You got to use the promo code Locked On. It's all good to go. FanDuel's got the spreads. They got the player props. They got the over-under. So much more. Really not going to find more betting options really anywhere else. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Kick off this season. FanDuel, official partner of the NBA.
All right, so as we wrap up the victory for the Brooklyn Nets, a couple of things here. I'm going to do one for the Brooklyn Nets and then also one on the other side for the Toronto Raptors, because young players and talent in the NBA are always impressive. Nicholas Claxton had 4 blocks tonight, Doug, and this was per Nets PR. he moved into third all time in their first 8 games for the Brooklyn Nets, behind only Sean Bradley and Daryl Dawkins. Moved ahead of, you can name them, 2000, 2001, Doug, front of your lobe. Who's the guy? High flyer, not a pure center. Hit me with it. Blocks.
Oh, is it Kenny
Martin? I knew you'd get there. I didn't even have to help you. Never was going to land that one. I was shocked by that, by the way.
I said Kenny Martin. You heard me say it, right?
What?
I said Kenny Martin. Did you not hear me say it?
Oh, wow. Great. Check the tape, guys. Give him full credit for that one. Sorry. I was too busy assuming that Doug would not be that sharp of an eagle eye. Really a reminder with Nicholas Claxton. They tried to hack him late in this game. He's doing just enough, maybe at the free throw line. Usually not tonight. 62% on the season, but 1 for 4 this evening. I keep coming back to the way he works around the basket. He had 8 rebounds in this game. The 4 blocks really kind of, I think, symbolized exactly what you need him to be in a game like this. Rim protector. And by the way, they didn't do a ton of this either. I know I'm going long-winded. There was a point here where I also saw an effort to keep Claxton from having to get all the way out to the perimeter without following his assignments defensively away, just so that he was in position to anchor and provide that help defense around the rim. There was a little bit of a balancing act there, I think, for some stretches, especially when you have a Siakam, a Scotty Barnes, and OG. Like, you have guys that can get around there and cause problems defensively. It was just a really nice game for him all around.
Still just annoyed you didn't hear me say Kenny Martin. Just go back and re-listen.
I'll check the tape just to confirm that. I feel like
I think you thought I was checked out, but I think you thought I was checked out, but I was listening and I was formulating the answer and I said it, and then I was like annoyed that you said it at the same time because I was like, dude, I got this. No worry, no worry. Look, Claxton has just made so many improvements here. There's a clear comfort with him. The role is perfect for what he needs to do. Like, he's going to be a guy that we're going to have real questions about because he's going to command big money. Like, he deserves it. It's going to be well deserved. The guy's playing at an elite level, especially defensively. He makes some really high degree of difficulty blocks that it's one thing to block shots. It's another thing to sort of like block the kind of shots that he blocks. All right. Like the one that they replayed, that the one that they got it overturned where it was going to be, they called it goaltending and then got it overturned. Like, that's not an easy block. That ball is up. He was catching it already going up. It was really high up in the air and he wasn't that close to it. To catch that ball still on the arc up, it's just not easy to do. We've seen him make offhand blocks, which is another thing that's incredibly difficult. The guy's he's just awesome. He's awesome. And there's still comfort around the rim in terms of his offensive game. I think we've seen that grow. I don't think we've seen the ceiling with him yet. I'm not sure what the ceiling is. It's probably not so much higher, but I still do not think we are there with it. And it's just, the guy, he's awesome. And I was going to get a little concerned because Day'Ron had a rough game this game and they kept him really late into it, like within 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes left to go. And Claxton hadn't checked back in. And I was like, oh, baby. I was actually worried he might have been hurt. But then they just kind of were waiting for it, and he checked in on the timeout. But, overall, just like a total A-plus effort for him.
I did Day'Ron in the first, 2.5 minutes of his game action. I was like, oh, he's putting together a nice little performance. Nothing after that necessarily continued to inform that perspective on him. Just a little bit of a rougher night for him. Before we get out of here, I will say, because I think whether it's going to be in our bonus podcast episode tonight or in an entirely separate one, I have a very clear perspective on why exactly what Doug was talking about, we're talking about Claxton, cannot be overlooked when it talks about retaining him or not, because the future could be a world where you say, if only we had a player like Nicholas Claxton. You have him right now. Scotty Barnes, though, we don't often give credit to the other team. Scotty Barnes, 300-plus points, 150-plus rebounds, 100-plus assists, 30-plus steals, and 20-plus blocks in this first 18 games. It's the most since 84-85. Giannis hit that mark in 2016-17. When you talk about just like singular talents, and appreciating really quality players in the league, Scotty Barnes is a really young guy that obviously, if the Nets could have sent any of the stars in order to get him a couple off seasons ago, they would have. Impressive, man. Like, I'll pluck that out, even if he didn't jump off the screen necessarily in tonight's game.
I mean, not all improvement is linear, right? Growth is linear in the NBA, and he kind of had what a lot of people would consider to be a down year last year. Yeah. All of a sudden, if he's going to shoot 38% from three, like just for starters, he's a superstar. He's probably getting close to that already. Every number for him is up, even though the minutes are down. Like, he's up, 2.5 rebounds this year. The assists are up, the scoring is up, the 3-point percentage is so much better. Like, just like everything basically is better for him at 22 years old. Yeah, he's awesome. He's a centerpiece kind of guy, right? I'm not much more to say about that except for it's a good reminder, and we're seeing this with other players now too. It's a good reminder about not just watching a guy in their second year or something like that and just thinking that's the story and it's written in pen and that's just it, right? Because there's just so many cases of guys third year, fourth year where it really start to make the ascension, especially if they're super young, got into the league at 19 or something like that, like Scotty did. It's just a reminder to say, hey, just because it's like this now, especially when there's pedigree, and Barnes had pedigree as a high draft pick, that we shouldn't just write the story and think it's just totally over. We're seeing this. You see this every Kate Cunningham, everyone. It happens all the time with these guys. Now sometimes it's, I don't know who's. I can't think of. I'll think of a name, but sometimes it just never comes around, right? Right. Sure. But there are times like this where it's oh, you just need to get in the third year to start feeling really comfortable, get point guard duties, get Fred VanVleet out of there, so you're running more pick and roll, right. Stuff like that, right? So Wiseman is the guy I was trying to think of. Sometimes it just never happens. James, it's just okay, he was number one pick, it's over, don't worry about it. But these big wing guys, if they can figure out the spacing and the shooting, I mean, there's it's hard to see the ceiling sometimes, and that's where he's kind of trending toward.
And that's also, listen, as I said, with the Nets winning this game, and I think that stat like that, a player that does feel like he's taking that next big step forward, Pascal Siakam being on the floor for them. We often talk about, hey, if you said, who would you take first on either one of these squads? Well, guess what? You might end up with more Raptors at the top than you would Brooklyn Nets, at least in the immediate. And yet the Nets find a way to get wins against these type of teams, get themselves their third straight victory, and continue to put themselves right now game above 500, 9-8. That's all you can ask for. And I think, I want to say 6-4 at home to this point of the season. So also protecting home court in Brooklyn. That's all I can ask for, Doug. That's all I got.
All right, a little bit break here. Thursday they play against Charlotte. Got to be a W in Charlotte here. Got to get the 10-8. Charlotte, no LaMelo Ball for a long time. We're going to get into some other stuff. We'll get into the podcast talking about Cam Thomas. Make sure in the interim that you are subscribed over on YouTube. It's just a single click. Just subscribe on YouTube. Doesn't cost you anything. It'll alert you when we're going to be going live, which we're doing after every single game, and get you the game previews, everything else. Make sure you subscribe in the podcast as well. Those are just two ways to help the show for free. If you want to jump in for a way that's not for free, but you want to take a free trial, join subtext.com/lockedonnets. You go over, you join the conversation with Adam and I over on Subtext. So join subtext.com/lockedonnets.
If you spend too much time thinking about a thing, you'll never get it done. That's Bruce Lee.
Oh, one of the RIP, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow and in a moment on YouTube talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Yeah. When the post game ends, the post game podcast begins. It is, of course, going to be a discussion beyond the podcast and with you, the fans. And tonight, Cam Thomas injury update that says the young star can be back on the court sooner than later. What does it mean for Brooklyn as they continue to try to push their way up the Eastern Conference standings? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast, radio Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marnbrecht. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms, and it is the post-podcast podcast where Doug, in addition to letting everybody know, as we always do, at Locked On Nets to get your questions up, we'll star them. We'll get in with you guys, the faithful, showing up every single time for these. But Cam Thomas injury update, got to get you pretty excited that the Brooklyn Nets are going to get back their leading scorer. That's right, their leading scorer sooner than later.
Yeah, pregame stuff from Jacques Vaughn, gave a couple injury updates on Cam Thomas and Dennis Smith Jr., nothing on Ben Simmons, but did say that Thomas had begun on-court scrimmaging, I got there, and had really, really ramped up basketball activities. Did not give a clear day, but said that the return was soon. If we're reading between the lines on this with this kind of language, my guess is that the return is Saturday against Orlando. Possibly see him as early as Charlotte on Thursday. I don't think it goes beyond that. Now, look, there's a little weirdness with the schedule because with the in-season tournament, like they don't have games scheduled between the 2nd and the 11th right now. There are going to be games then, right. But once this in-season tournament works out, I'm pretty sure they're going to fill in these 9 days with just like they just didn't know who was going to be going where. Right. So there is, if you look at the schedule, there's a gap, but there's not really a gap. Again, just guessing around this stuff around when coaches and when everyone feels comfortable to start talking about injury stuff when it comes to soon, that usually means a game or two. Yeah. And so I think at the very latest right now, we will see Cam Thomas Saturday against Orlando with the outside chance, and I'd love to be wrong here, but this would be great, the chance to see him Thursday against Charlotte. So I think all signs are pointing and trending in the right direction with Cam. They could really use him back. And we just want to be able to see him play basketball again. So really cool news.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny, man, to have the start of this season. And obviously we mentioned, leading the team in scoring prior to the injury with 27 points per game. But then we get, it was 8 games played, 7 games started, and then it gets ripped away from you. And for a fan base that's been clamoring for this now going all the way back to last year, right? Why isn't he getting minutes? Why isn't he getting a role? It feels like it was taken away just before you could really start to ramp up. My hope is here, whether it is Thursday or Saturday, that once he steps back on the court, we just talked about this in our last episode, Doug, some of the decisions for Jacques Vaughn have been taken out of his hands, right, in terms of the pressure of how you want to make the starting unit, rotations. Well, guess what? You're about to have a big decision to make, and hopefully we see Cam Thomas be inserted directly into the starting lineup, though he could come off the bench. There's a case for that, and fans would hate it. I just think that he can help, not just Mikal Bridges, not just the perimeter shooters and the ISO situations. It just seems too easy to say a team that's now 9-8 and hopefully 10-8 after Charlotte. This guy can actually help you sustain being above 500 going forward as well.
Yeah, I bet he comes off the bench to start, and they're going to say, and they're going to say something like, "We're managing his minutes on his return," and it's going to be like that one little out where they're going to say something. That's my guess. And it's going to be like, "We'll give ourselves one more game to kind of see what happens." And we're managing his minutes and we're working him back into action. It's much easier to manage someone's minutes when they're returning from, an injury and when they come off the bench. So I guess I think they're going to kick the problem one more day down the road is my guess. And then I think they're going to have a real question on their hands. I think you will see like real vitriol if he just goes back to be a bench guy, right? If he's coming off the bench. That being said, it's sometimes tough to know exactly who to move onto the bench out of this group that I just said before has been a plus basketball group for a lot of minutes now. And it's hard to look other guys in the eye and whoever you move. It's funny about how the way the team is set up now, whoever you move, you are moving like sort of a key, like the Nets have guys who like, everyone kind of fits a role and they don't really have a lot of other guys that do the same things. Mm-hmm. So anyone you move to the bench, you're going to lose some kind of skill that you really, that Cam Thomas isn't necessarily replacing, even though he's better at really basically at anyone that's scoring, right? Because anyone that you move out of the starting lineup now in favor of Cam Thomas, I can tell you exactly what you're missing or like what the problem would be with the understanding that the scoring would be improved.
Well, by the way, and I'll round it out this way. And I know sometimes this matters more to fans than others. He's averaging 32 and a half minutes, 33 minutes a game. As long as he averages 33 minutes a game, not in the first game back necessarily, as long as I'm getting 33 minutes plus from Cam Thomas, I don't care whether he starts or not. It's about him being on the court to be able to be productive. And I think that may end up being a little bit of the short-term theme, at least when you talk about some of the things you lose if you're going to take out. By the way, who are you taking out? Right?
That's
Spencer
what I mean.
Dinwiddie? Well, where's the ball handling go, right? Cameron Johnson, whether the contract or not, well, now you're losing some of the size and some of the defensive ability. So it's not a knock on Cam Thomas. He is this singular electric scoring talent, but that right now, that is his function. And so you can move that around. You can move Lonnie Walker around wherever you want to because he can get you some buckets from the outside and drive to the basket a little bit coming off the bench. That's what Cam Thomas is. I think it actually should be a good thing for Nets fans to know he'll be able to play with anybody and be able to take over games whenever you ask him to. And that might be even more valuable coming off the bench than inside the starting unit.
Yeah, the one pushback I would give there is that if you are coming off the bench, it's very difficult to get the 30 minutes. Like only just because the math gets really tough. One, it's like it doesn't build in a break for you. So let's say you sit out the first 5 minutes, right? Well, there's only 42 minutes left, right, in the game for you to be able to play. So you're gonna if your first rotation is to be like off the bench, like at the 5 minute mark, so that's your 43 minutes, like now there's very little wiggle room to like get you rest during the game. So like that's why you really don't see bench guys really ever getting to 30. Like there's a few cases where some like Tyler Hero a few years ago where they just refused to start him. Like that guy would get close. But right now in the NBA, there's nobody. I'm just trying to think. I do this. I do this every single night. So there's no one when I project bench minutes. I don't really ever take anyone. What's that?
What's like the cap that you almost never clear with a bench?
I almost never clear like 24. Sometimes we'll go to like 26 on like a Christian Brown, right? Like a guy like that with Hero and Hero, I would do it. IQ, like quickly, he gets to 25, 26, something like that. But like it's pretty rare for teams that aren't like going through injuries and that are and that are pretty set in stone with their rotations. You just don't see it. Now again, it's not impossible. I'm just telling you that it doesn't like Bogdan Bogdanovic. He's another guy. He can push it. Like it's very consistent. So it can be done. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it takes more of a concentrated effort to do it. It has to be like your core set rotation that everyone sort of bought in on. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not, believe me, I'm not saying it's impossible. It can happen. It actually happens more with these combo guards. Like LeVert can kind of get there at times, coming off the bench for Cleveland when everyone's healthy. I'm just kind of scrolling through the teams to see, like, just sometimes it's hard for me off the top of my head to remember all the guys. But those are the kind of guys. Those are the kind of guys. So it can be done. I'm just telling you that it's just like not a real commonplace thing in the NBA for sure.
Well, and I think ultimately, like, it would take some intentional approach to, again, we said this about, Nicholas Claxton, who starts, or Ben Simmons, right? Symbolic gesture here versus who's going to finish the games out. It can be that Spencer Dinwiddie starts, but that ultimately, by the time you get to half and you come out in the third and fourth quarters, it's going to transition a little bit more to Cam Thomas. And by the way, I can't one-to-one that as being that's the player you take out, because without a Ben Simmons, you actually want to have probably a Spencer Dinwiddie on the court to help set up Cam Thomas a little bit as well. So it's a funky thing to figure out. The bottom line is, knowing that he'll be back, and that's the problem that, quote unquote problem that Jacque Vaughn is going to have to address. Great. Have that problem, try to figure that out. And ultimately, let's just see Cam Thomas pick up where he left off, right? Because he only had basically one off night in those first 8 games, in those first 7 starts, one off shooting night. That means that it gave us the sense this is a repeatable process. Coming up here in a second, though, guys, it is the podcast. And that means it's about you boys. And we've got a whole, and ladies, we've got a whole slew of starred comments and questions that we're going to get to. And we'll dive into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you again about our friends over on FanDuel, where new customers are getting $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. The money line, you're picking the winner. Now you're going to pay some odds on that. Maybe you want to go underdog. Good thing, hopefully you wouldn't have gone Toronto, go against our Brooklyn Nets with the team on the road. But maybe you went with the Brooklyn Nets going in tonight at minus 133, 135 on that money line. If you're a new customer over at FanDuel, you won that bet. You got $150 in bonus bets for you to use any way you like. That's what you're going for. Your team wins, you get the $150 in bonus bets. You're good to go. Spreads, over unders, player props, so much more. You can just drill down right inside the game. Do player combos like points, rebounds, assists. Those are my favorite. Those are really tied to minutes. So, want to get into the action, go do the points plus rebounds plus assists over at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get in the action this NBA season. FanDuel, official partner of the NBA.
All right, so as we continue our post-podcast talking about Cam Thomas, talking about where we think this team is going, and then talking about you, the fans. We got a whole bunch of these, Doug, start up here. So I'm going to start to roll through them. You can jump in if there's a particular one that you wanted to get in on. This one just came up here last second, so I'm just going to highlight it real quick. I don't trust JV with Cam Thomas.
I don't blame you. I was
going to say, Doug and I at times can feel like we are the last line of defense against sometimes the onslaught against Jacque Vaughn. There's been some case studies over the last season or so that Jacque Vaughn is in the way of young players and just kind of unleashing them. I will say that if we want to believe that Jacques Vaughn and the organization was like, hey, there's certain things we need to see from you, right? Just fundamental stuff, off day stuff, practice stuff. Whether or not it feels like it took longer than it should have, they seem to have crossed that threshold with Cam Thomas. So I'm optimistic that there is not a Jacques Vaughn concern when it comes to Cam Thomas and his role just growing here over the course of this season.
I don't blame people for being worried about it, though, because we
No.
went through multiple seasons of this, and it's like we've talked about it last episode when we were grading Jacques Vaughn, talking about, what a problem we thought he had was that, like, sometimes he gets too stuck on certain guys and doesn't want to play some of the younger guys. And we've seen that sort of, or, becomes a little stuck in his rotations or doesn't want to make too many changes like that. And I don't blame you for being worried about this with Cam. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. And I think there's going to be, my guess is there's going to be sort of consternation around whatever happens, right. But there will be significant amount of it if Cam is like, this is not, I don't think it's going to happen, but if you came back off the bench and was playing like 22 minutes or something like that, right. I really don't think that's going to happen. But the fact that it's even in the range of outcomes because of Jacques Vaughn, like, probably should be discussed.
Of course.
I don't think it's crazy. It's not, you can't put that at a 0% chance knowing Vaughn's history with some of this stuff.
No, 100%. So we'll see as he gets back out on the court. Hit this one quickly here just from Nader, frequent flyer. When Royce is hitting shots, it feels like we can't lose. His shots give us such a momentum boost. There's certain guys like this. I mean, we talk about Dorian Finney-Smith being a little bit of a gritty guy. Dennis Smith Jr. has that attitude, even though he hasn't been able to be healthy. Royce O'Neale, like, he certainly does have a demonstrative nature about him when he's on. Like, when he's on and knocking down these shots, it does feel like, for a 30-plus-year-old guy who is now a bench player for this team, was supposed to be superstar supporter, just a season ago. He when he is locked in, gives you a really great performance. The other side of that coin has been disappearing acts where you go, well, this is why a 30-year-old coming off the bench can't be relied on. Tonight was one of those nights. It was great to see it.
Yeah, I don't get that feeling from him, but I know what you mean. Probably, I kind of feel like that about I just think that 3-point shooting is super streaky and with high variance.
When guys are on, everybody kind of gets jacked up on it,
and it's just always going to feel like that with everybody because it's just the nature of the 3-point shot. The nature of the 3-point shot is like you hit it somewhere around 30% of the time. That means like somewhere around 65% of the time you're pissed off.
Right. Yeah, I only get this feeling one out of every 3 times. Some often.
Exactly. Exactly. So you're going to feel pissed off about it, and it's going to feel like that happened. But when you lump them together, it's going to feel like just the greatest high in the world. And so I get the feeling. I don't particularly feel that about him, but I definitely know what you mean.
Johnny, frequent flyer. I know we're good friends now, so I nickname him Johnny. Hey, fellas, depending on a Ben Simmons situation, do you think Brooklyn would take a big swing and trade Simmons and 3 first-round picks for Pascal Siakam? Well, God. Doug, you started this one. Now, I could give my opinion, but I'll let you.
I think I just read the depending. I don't think I read all the way through it. I'm not against you, Jonathan. I would never do it. You can't do this. Well, no, one Toronto, I wouldn't do it, but you can't. Siakam's old. I think that kind of gets lost. Let me just make sure. Is he 31 now? I'll double check.
He's 30, going to be 31 at a minimum.
Okay, yeah. So are you guessing at that, or you know that?
No, I know he's 30. I know he's 30.
No, okay. Yeah, right. So he is 30, and he's 29. He's gonna be 30 this year.
Oh, Doug.
You'll be signing him in his age 30, 31 season. I mean, these guys are just on the downslope. I don't think you can do it. Now, I know what you're saying, like attach assets to get out of the Simmons thing, but Siakam's just a free agent. So I don't think that this is a trade. I don't think this is a trade that I would do. No. So we can move on from this one.
I'm almost embarrassed because I almost was positive that he was 30 years old. I said it confidently. Well, that's what you get sometimes. Listen, guys. What do you think about a trade centered on Claxton and Siakam? I love Claxton, but Pascal is more of what we need. I think I'm just highlighting this one quickly here because I think it falls into the same bag where you're getting a guy that's older, you're getting a guy that's going to cost you something to keep around, and this wouldn't be something that I would do, especially even if you were going to entertain this, it'd have to be predicated on a 100% healthy team with Ben Simmons playing really good basketball right now. Ben Simmons is injured and a non-factor, so I just can't explode those. I like Pascal Siakam, but I like him better going to a championship win now team this season than coming to Brooklyn. Let's hit up another frequent flyer, Jean Remy. If the Nets get a good trade from another team for Claxton, let's just keep these trades and Claxton themes rolling. Should they trade him? Let's say Dallas, for example. Dallas has Derek Lively. I know he's a rookie, but he's already starting to show some of the defensive things as to why he was drafted. Go check out Rafael Barlow did a great job breaking down his game and why he liked him a lot. I wouldn't see. Do you disagree that I wouldn't see Dallas being the team that would make a really big offer for Nick Claxton?
I think they probably would have been in the mix if they hadn't drafted Lively. I think they are interesting though, because I wonder if they get to a point where, right now, so Dallas is 10-6 right now. So I do wonder if they get to the point where at the trade deadline, they're like, hey, we actually are really good and we like Lively, but he's just too raw for where we think we're going now. Right. And so
I
I
can't
can
go
see
deep playoff run with Lively in a prominent role.
Maybe not. Right. And where it's and Claxton is sort of getting close to a finished product here. And I don't think they would do it. It's interesting. I don't know if you saw, but Mark Cuban just sold a minority stake in the Mavericks today.
I know.
So I don't know.
And peek behind the curtain, Doug and I were really close to buying in on that one, but
brutal beat. But so anyway, no, I think it's interesting. I think if they hadn't drafted Lively, I would say they would be a really big candidate to want to go for this. I'm not sure if I would. I think to consider trading Claxton, you have to be a major haul. I'm not sure a package around Lively gets it done, right, frankly. And then Nets already have some Dallas draft picks here with the thing. So I don't think this is totally likely. I do wonder as we get down toward the nitty gritty where I don't think they're going to do it, because this is not an organization that I think anymore is going to take swings like this, especially with young guys. I just think that the Nets are going to be really vanilla around their moves, and that's just not going to be the kind of move they make. I think the strong betting odds are just them re-signing Claxton because it feels good, and he's easy to root for, and that stuff. And it wouldn't necessarily be wrong. I just don't think that this administration now is in the do anything too crazy mode.
Well,
right. I just for better or for worse. There's a part of that that's not good, but I don't know.
On the fun side of it, if you did a trade like this, we could get Omax Prosper in the building, which I was desperate to have happen. So it'd always be good to get him.
Yeah, he's buried too. I'm not sure.
I know, unfortunately. But listen, we can still enjoy the prospect of it. But here's what I will say to tie a bow on some of the Claxton talk. I said this inside the episode. The idea of should you take the haul for him now because he may never be more valuable and what he looks like on other teams and the contract, all that stuff. Okay. But given his age and his skill set, understanding that the Nets don't have the superstar guy. But if the idea is they're keeping all the powder dry for a big swing, maybe Claxton has to be a part of that. That could certainly be a case. But if you give up a ton of draft picks and you bring in the player that we say, well, Claxton would be perfect if he played with a superstar caliber guy. Well, you'll have already gotten rid of it. You have him now. And while you may pay a little bit more upfront than you'd like to, it'll occupy a little more on the cap than you'd prefer, given what the expectation is for the team over the next couple of years. 3 years from now, Nicholas Claxton will only be 26, 27 years old. He's still going to be incredibly young, and hopefully his prime could be that little something extra. So I don't know. I feel very comfortable just re-signing him and seeing what the next move is, because you'll also always be able to reevaluate that. Just like with McHale, just like with Cameron Johnson, you can always go back to the well and say, hey, you want to blow our socks off? Then yes, we will entertain these ideas.
I just get worried about re-signing guys like this, that it's just kind of it's not a needle moving move. And I get that the problem with being a needle mover now is that it probably takes being really uncomfortable, right? I get a little worried that the Nets are going to be sort of this just good-ish team with no real ceiling for 5 years. I think that is something, and I think that kind of thing can happen when you don't do something uncomfortable sometimes. And sometimes the uncomfortable thing is we might have to not re-sign a guy we like, or we might have to trade someone.
Rewind back. Jared Allen, regardless of what he turned out to be, you move on from Jared Allen, you move on from Karis LeVert. Again, these guys are not the upper echelon, but you make these moves to bring in stars, right? That was probably as least uncomfortable when you're getting Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, etc. But you knew the back end ramifications, right? The uncomfortable is we're taking a swing on something or making a decision about something, and the outcome is TBD, right? You don't have a guarantee what it translates into.
Yeah, the uncomfortable thing would be, I'm not advocating they do this. The uncomfortable thing would be we have really good assets right now, and we just trade all these guys now, right? And we just stockpile
Yes.
a massive amount of picks, and we are bad for a couple years, and we try to hit some real home runs in the draft. Like that would be the move. That's just hard to do, and I'm not advocating they do it. I'm just saying that sometimes you have to, like, the Nets don't have superstar talent on this roster right now. They have good talent, and they have some exciting guys, but they have nothing close to a superstar. And if you're, I mean, not anywhere close to a superstar. So if you are trying to win the championship, the Nets are years and years and years away from that, with like a weird path to getting there that I don't totally see. So that's all I'm saying about that.
Let's dive in on frequent flyer Jared Williams. We're gonna say this about everybody because you are the guys that show up for our post podcast. I think this is a good one just because I think our response is predicated on something other than the skill set of a Ben Simmons if healthy. Are the Brooklyn Nets better off without Ben Simmons? My answer is yes, based on the data. He gets injured too much, which makes him unreliable, which means you're always trying to prepare for the potential of what he looks like on the team versus what the team is without him. And by percentage, you're without him more than you're with him.
Oh yeah, I mean, if Sean Marks could like punt his contract into the ocean right now, he would do it. Like without even thinking about it, right? It's just like not even a question. It's not even. That's
probably the easiest way to answer it, right? Are they better off without him? Well, would they get rid of him if they could right now? Yes.
Well, if the money's attached to it, of course,
yeah.
they would do it in a heartbeat. It's like they wouldn't even think. They would, if there's somewhere a clause went through where you could just, like, the amnesty clause or something like that went through again, they would do it without even thinking. I can say that pretty firmly, I think. But, are they better off without him? I mean, just from a basketball standpoint, I'd love to have him back right now. He fills a lot of holes, even with the sort of holes in his game. He fills a lot of things that the team could really use right now. I wish he could play for 40 straight games or something and get really comfortable and start to work on some of these things. It's hard to see it happening.
But you would take the $40 million of cap space right now rather than Ben Simmons back right now.
I mean, this year I would just like whatever, just if it's because you're not doing anything with the cap space right now. So there'd be no reason to get, like, you can't go out and sign a free agent right now. So like this season,
or any free agent you're signing for $40 million would be a massive mistake.
If you can get it off for next year, of course.
Yeah.
Just sign literally anybody that you knew was going to play the whole season, or sign him back for the money he's worth. I don't know. Re-sign him for, the mid-level exception or something, because that's kind of just where he probably is worth now. He's just, the contract's just so brutal between the lack of availability and holes in his game. It's a terrible contract. There's no way around it.
100%. A couple more here before we get out the door. From Just Tweaking, what do you think about the bench of Ben, Thomas, Lonnie, O'Neale, and Sharp? So assuming Ben comes back, obviously healthy.
Like, this is a lineup, you saying? Like,
he's saying like this is your bench unit. So your starting unit is all the usual guys we talk about, and then this is your bench. I mean, we talked about Ben Simmons and pairing him with Thomas and how that can be fun and effective. I'm
trying to see if Simmons and Sharp have ever played together. I want to say that they have, maybe for 5 minutes, but I just want to look real quick.
That would be, while you pull that up. I mean, likewise when you have Claxton on the floor for different type of reasons, but Sharp's a non-shooter, so you'd be let me guess, overwhelmingly positive sample size on Ben Simmons and Day'Ron Sharp.
Well, I said okay, so there's two now. I said because it was 42 minutes, so that was more than I thought.
Okay.
And then I did another when I saw it was a negative 29 net rating.
But that adds up. That math.
But 42 minutes is like too small, so whatever. That could have gone. It'd be hard to do jumping. It'd be hard to celebrate around the positive or negative number there. It's too small. I don't mind that. I don't mind trying this stuff. I'm all for Simmons playing. Like, he fits a lot of these different guys really well. I love the Simmons and Cam Thomas pairing.
Yeah, I know, like, that one works. Yeah,
that's perfect. That's like, those guys are built to play together. One guy doesn't want to shoot, and the other guy, all he wants to do is shoot. Like, that's literally, you can't probably pair two guys together. One guy can guard point of attack. There are guys like, getting better at defense, but still not good. I would literally, if you were trying to think of guys to put with Simmons, I really think Cam Thomas would be really close to the top of like anyone in the NBA about a guy that should play with Simmons. That's not really overboard. It's just true, right? Like, think about all the things each of these guys does. So, like, literally the opposite player in every aspect from each other in all the best ways.
Maybe go with Trae Young, right?
Well, no, I mean Trae Young runs pick and roll. Like he passes. He got like a high assist rate. Like
true.
Cam Thomas doesn't
else.
pass the ball. But that's
Right.
okay when he plays with Simmons because Simmons doesn't want to shoot the ball. Like he'll go to the rack, he can set screens, they can get out in transition. Cam's really good there. Like they literally are a perfect pairing together. It's just that they haven't been able to do it. They have played Cam Thomas and Ben Simmons have played 320 minutes together of positive basketball with a with like a 119 offensive rating. It's just like it just makes sense to me, and it makes sense stylistically too if you think about it. Even if you just had never seen them play together, I mean, which we have, but even if you had never seen them play together, you would say to yourself, "Oh, I can see why that would really work," right? Like,
right.
I don't know. So
Facilitator, pace pusher, table setter, defensive length, size, Ben Simmons, and then pure scorer, ISO basketball. Doesn't need you to be functional offensively for him to be successful. 100%.
When you back out, by the way, I just real quick backed out Durant and Irving because some of those guys did overlap.
Yeah.
It was neutral. I mean, the offensive rating was 118, so it's like awesome on offense. Couldn't stop anybody. But I do wonder if they're like a little more built this year to like be able to withstand some of that. Like when Kyrie and KD were there. Oh no, I guess those guys wouldn't have been there. Anyway, I think they're probably I think they're a little more built defensively to even like withstand some of that stuff now too.
It reminds me of there's it's not a great movie. It's a really bad 80s movie. Steve Martin, The Man with Two Brains. He takes the one brain and he puts it into the body. I don't know if the science is totally sound on it, but if you could,
sounds like it works.
Sounds like it works to me.
I kind of heard all I needed to hear. I mean, that sounds like it works.
Coming in from, does that say Corn? Coming in from Corn Love Train. Excuse you. You're our new frequent flyer. Don't ever leave the chat. Can you guys ponder the off-ball screen? Is it happening and I'm just not seeing it? Well, just real quick here, Corn. You can't come in here with a handle like this and then ask like a straightforward basketball question. You gotta riff with us a little bit. Doug, feel free to take this one. I'm getting
off-ball screening happened more. So the off-ball screening that they've run traditionally this year. Okay, so they run like traditional high pick and roll with Dinwiddie, right? And they run that a decent amount. We've seen other actions that they've run this year, like they run a double drag is the one they like to run a lot, right? Which is like two bigs that kind of pull across, sometimes in like mini transition, two bigs kind of come across. It's like sort of a double screen across the top, usually around the top of the key to free up like a ball handler or shooter. We've seen that one. Today they were running more. And with Simmons at times we'll see them run like pistol, which is like a dribble handoff move, it's a down screen into a dribble handoff. And like, you'll see like Cam Johnson set a down screen and then like Bridges will come up, get a handoff from Ben Simmons or something like that. Right. Like these are some of the actions that they'll run. They did run a little bit more of just, of pin downs so like Cam Johnson ran a couple pin downs just to free up Mikhail to like just get the defensive assignments confused. We definitely saw a little bit more of that tonight. I'd probably say I think I saw it like 6 possessions. I was not tracking it for each one, so I'm sure I saw it like 6 times. I'm sure it happened more. That's like I said before in the podcast. I think that's a really good sign for them to do it. I wouldn't mind them running, especially with Cam, run like a little more zoom action where it's like running. That's where you're running a shooter sort of around basically like 2 screens that are in the dunker spots, right? And you see like Devin Booker will run this, Curry will run it. Like they'll run these like sort of actions, and it helps if you have another shooter as a screener in the dunker because they can break out too. It's like hard to explain while we're talking about it, but go look up zoom action and you'll see what I mean. It's a little Nets do not run this, but
you need
they have
a Dorian Finney-Smith to be a part of that with like a Nick Claxton.
Well, he could be a screener, but you really need a shooter. Like you really need like a good shooter. Like you need a good offensive player because he's the guy that's coming off. It's designed specifically for good offensive players where they like really good on ball guys because it's trying to free them up either for like a quick 3-pointer or for guys scrambling to help, and then those guys can blow by them, right?
Yeah,
like they're scrambling out to close out.
And Claxton being those 2 players with
it'd be like let's say Cam Thomas is running it, and then Cam Johnson is one of the screeners because he can break out for a 3.
Okay.
So like you basically run an action where like Cam Johnson can be the second screen, and then you have like sort of an option of like you either run through the screens or you break back out. Anyway, I think I'm doing an okay job explaining it, but like these are sorry. That's a floppy action. Sorry. I'm describing floppy. Sorry.
Wait,
I screwed that up. I was getting into Zoom. Describe a floppy action. Look up floppy action. That's the one I'm describing with these shooters. So anyway, long story short, floppy action is something that I would like to see them run more, but they haven't been.
I played Where in the World is Carmen San Diego on floppy disk on my original Apple computer. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel stupid for getting that wrong. I was talking about pistol, and I got caught up in that.
What I would say is
I was the whole thing I just described as a floppy action.
The point being, though, is like there are things that they can do to be more effective with Cam Thomas in the offensive end. Last couple here, just really quick, just notes for things to watch about. There's a Watford and from Watford and Simmons. One wants to always attack and hit the floater, while one always wants to pass it up. Again, like we said about Trendon Watford, just seeing more of him. That's one of the combinations. Talk about bench units, whoever, where people are starting, because he has the outside shot and because he can run the floor in transition pretty well. A bit of a clunky game for him tonight. But Doug is I think falls back to this often. Make Ben Simmons healthy. There's a lot of players that could play well off of him and that could work well with him in combination. It's just that he needs to be on the court to do so. Dwayne Green, do you think Cam Thomas coming off the bench would stop Lonnie's momentum? Probably not, as long as you're still giving the same type of minutes that you're getting to Lonnie Walker. But
there's a problem with bringing Cam Thomas off the bench because these guys are hard to pair together.
I was going to say, now you do have to separate them somehow, and how do you functionally make that happen?
This is why you should start Cam Thomas and kind of bring in a guy like Lonnie Walker. This is a problem. I'm telling you right now. Go make a rotation that you feel really good about. Someone's not going to play. Someone that has been good this season, or you kind of need for some role,
right,
is not going to play. And there's just not enough minutes. I'm telling you right now, go put in a rotation thing. There's a bunch of apps that can do this. Go just make a little spreadsheet and give yourself 240 minutes and think about how players overlap. There's a rotation planner that you can go out and actually like make a rotation. I think it might just be called rotationplanner.com. But you can, I'll look it up real quick. But
so here would
go
be the thing. Go ahead. Because this is the problem that you're going to run into. And as you said, these combinations. Okay, either you're backing out Spencer Dinwiddie for the specific reason of, okay, scorer and he can run the second unit. Okay, fine. You don't want to give up size. And now Cam Thomas is in the starting unit. Okay. But you understand what you've lost, a ball handler, because you don't have Ben Simmons. The other logical one to me, from all things being considered, who's on the roster, the coaching, blah, 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 Dorian Finney-Smith. Because you feel like you're not going to take Cam Johnson out of the rotation or Mikal Bridges. They leave in Spencer Dinwiddie for ball handling and Claxton because he's your starter. If you take out Dorian Finney-Smith for Cam Thomas, you know what that is. That's a very small lineup that is violently dependent on Nicholas Claxton to do everything defensively for you.
This was suggested a decent amount when I posited this and said, who moves out, and people put the Spencer, Cam, Mikal, Cam Johnson, and Claxton lineup together. And my answer for every time was probably pretty good on offense, gets destroyed on defense, and killed on the glass.
Yeah.
And if you're ready to just live with that and be okay with it, then that's okay. But I'll tell you right now, that lineup gets murdered on the glass. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Like, they don't have enough size.
You can close out here. Anyone, and I think we have an episode coming up here probably on the off day about this thing, rotations, rosters, and we can break these things down a bit. The pushback would be, yeah, well, they suck defensively anyway. What's the difference? Like that would be
there, I guess. Yeah, know? I mean,
but
yeah,
I would.
It would be more. It'd be way worse.
Yes,
it'd be way worse because like the perimeter defense would be bad and the interior defense would be bad. At least now there's a few speed bumps out there, and we have seen that like the second unit and stuff gets really. I've noticed that one thing. One reason I do wonder about the defensive rating, and this is something I started queuing to tonight, and I don't know if it's totally the reason. They gamble a lot. And I'm wondering if like that's part of what they're just saying, like, hey, we have to gamble because we're just like maybe not great defensively.
Mm-hmm.
So they're gambling on like just different passes and or just like,
as opposed
to and then it's leading to some easier baskets. And I noticed it a little bit more tonight. And I was just thinking, I was like, oh, I wonder if this has actually been happening more and I have not noticed it. And this is starting to explain a little bit about why the defensive rating doesn't seem to pass the eye test. And is that like this over aggressive nature that sometimes actually really works out? Like against Chicago, when it looked like Chicago didn't do anything and they're being super aggressive and it's like, it looks like they're in every lane. Right. And they're just, and it's like making it so difficult to pass. That version of defense lives really close to, easy baskets.
Right.
Because if you don't get
assignments, wide open looks.
If you don't get your hand on the ball, then it's just kind of easy for someone. And I I don't know why I noticed it more tonight, but that's something I think everyone should keep an eye out for. Is like if it's like these like if they're making gambles just even on passes or on just like trying to go for strips, when those things don't work, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Sometimes. So I don't know, something to keep an eye on.
We'll be back in. We have no basketball until Thursday night, but you know that the podcast is going to continue rolling along. And I think this is the topic of conversation, roster and rotations with the impending return of Cam Thomas. What makes the most sense? How do you construct two successful starting and bench units without sacrificing any of the players that have made real headway for themselves along the way? In the meantime, over on YouTube, it's very simple. You go ahead and you subscribe. You turn on the alerts. Doug also doesn't mind if you head over your podcast feed, leave a 5-star glowing review. He sets the high benchmark. Isn't me personally. He says 5 stars or bust, and I endorse that. And then in the meantime, you follow at Doug Norrie, at Adam Armbrecht, and at Locked On Nets over on Twitter. We'll be back again next time, Doug. You're done for the night.
I'm so annoyed that I'm so annoyed that I did that whole thing about. I'm never gonna forgive myself for knowing this calling this action Zoom and not floppy. Adam already knows he's gonna talk to me about. I'm gonna complain about this for 5 minutes that I did this because I actually just know what this is and I just used the wrong word. And these are the kind of things. Hey, look. This is the bar that I set. This is the kind of things that drive me nuts about myself. This is why it's hard to live with me, but why you get a good podcast out of it. All right. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.